Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. My name's Joel Doolin. I'm the Deputy Chief Counsel at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. I think some of you may have heard of us during 2017. It's a fancy way of saying I'm the number 2 attorney there. It's only, I've been there 2.5 years, but that includes the hurricane season 2017. Prior to that, I had the privilege of serving in our Navy for 30 years, both as a surface warfare officer and as a judge advocate. Managing, I guess, some crises, everything from the international to the internal. One reason why I'm very enthusiastic to be with 100 business leaders who have to manage crises of your own on a daily basis, I think you will find there are actually similarities between what our government does, our emergency managers do, and the problem sets that you face. I'm hoping so, because FEMA's whole strategy and authorities and intention is to work with the whole community to prepare our country for whatever emergency may come next. And we always need the help, and what we do to prepare today will influence how well we do in those crises. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Gwen?
So my name is Gwywn Whitaker. I want to thank Ron and for the opportunity to come and speak today. I own a restaurant called Green Fare, and you're probably thinking one of these things is not like the other. I'm the only person that's not with the government. I started and ran a company called Mosaic for 10 years that I started 2 weeks after 9/11. I was actually up in New York City. My background had been in the intelligence community. I'm an electrical engineer by education, and I worked for some fantastic companies in big data, Cray Research, Silicon Graphics, Teradata. And I'd left the community in 1999 when it was a time of peace and the internet was booming. Those were the good days when there was no news in the newspaper. On 9/11, it was a life-changing experience, and I started a company called Mosaic that culminated in a sale, $8 million company 10 years later. After Osama bin Laden was taken out, I sold the company. And my career progression has been from supercomputing, data analytics, big data. I've gotten into electric vehicles 3 years ago, and now plant-based technology. Eric Schmidt from Google said that in 2016, plant-based technology was the #1 tech trend. And so being sort of loving to enable strategic change, I've been in that space now for 5 years, and come visit Green Fare in Herndon, Virginia.
And I would say Gwen is being a little modest. She is a serial entrepreneur, and her work supported the government in many crisis situations. So,
Sure.
Thank you for your work to support all of us.
My operations manager calls me Batman. I go from a meeting in quantum computing and a contract at the NRO to bussing tables at Green Fare. So thank you.
Doesn't like you, Ron. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me here to speak. My name's Jon Reeves, and like Mr. Kolm beside me, I'm originally from Australia and started my crisis management career, as it would be said, in mine rescue. And I sort of came from... There you go. Yeah.
First crisis resolved.
There you go. See?
That was a demo.
We're naturals at this stuff. So anyway, I worked in mine rescue and got to learn the hard way about crisis decision making and crisis response as it relates to specifically nuts and bolts of who you are going to rescue and who you're not going to rescue and why you're going to make those decisions. And I think a lot of that has given me a passion for the lighter side of emergency management, which is sort of helping people like you in this room, even though you don't know we're here working to help you. So I've now worked at the District of Columbia Water and Sewer Authority for nearly 10 years and have worked there as their emergency manager. I often tell people that I'm the guy in the Washington Post that they fire to fix everything when there was a problem. So I tend to be on the pointy end of the spear as it relates to really responding to crisis, responding to emergency, and making good decisions. And I'm looking forward to sharing a bit of that with you guys. And you know, it's not as hard as it looks.
Yes, it is. He's just very, very good at it. Good morning, everybody. My name's Jon Kolm. I worked originally in the intelligence community in Australia and then over here. I met a beautiful girl while working in that community, and that's what I'm doing now today in the United States. But that was my original background in intelligence work. I was qualified in two things. One of them was pure mathematics, which was the degree I was using at the time. The other one was psychology, which I kept secret because the intelligence community detests psychologists with a great passion. Because they can take you off the line, they can put you out of work. So after 10 years of that, I became much more interested in the end in people than in systems, and the failures and the crises that I'd seen over those 10 years as an operational field person were almost always to do with people and group and team dynamics rather than technology going wrong. So I began to segue away from things and toward human beings, and to start to quietly use that psychology degree without telling anybody. Eventually, I met an Air Force fighter pilot named Peter Ring, who had very much the same interests, and Peter and I began to work on those interests and try to build some sort of entrepreneurial picture out of it. We had no idea what, but the idea we had was, if you can build a little copy of reality, if you can build an artificial crisis-et, a little baby crisis, and give people 2 days to manage it, maybe then, given that it's reality-based, you can get better results than you do just by lecturing them. That was kind of our idea. That was 24 years ago. Here we are. Some of the clients that you may know include Toyota, IBM, Hitachi, Michelin, Polo Ralph Lauren. If you follow government affairs, then the State Department, the Office of Personnel Management, NASA, and a bunch of others.
Including FEMA.
Including FEMA. Thank you. Pardon me, Mr. Doolin. I'm sorry. Including FEMA. And what fascinates me is simply how groups and teams behave under duress, and that's what I'm absolutely intrigued by. And one day I'll retire when I understand it, but that will never happen.
Jon,
Thank you very much.
If I can ask you a question. When you do this leadership training, as far as the crisis side, what are these major companies looking for? How are they looking to train their people in crisis situations?
Thank you. The question was, what are the major corporations looking for when they look at crisis management, situation management? It's best answered by example, I think. It's certainly more interesting, perhaps. There are a couple I can talk about, a couple I can't. Toyota I can talk about. I have their permission. Toyota at one point had a massive strike in one of their major manufacturing plants. 2,000 people walked off the job in 15 minutes and nobody knew why. And they were losing $2.5 million a day. And there was no proximate cause. So we began to work with them, and they worked with themselves, and I will get right to the bottom line. It turned out to be a disagreement over a $30 uniform, and that cost $5 million of lost production during a strike. It's a perfect example of nonlinear dynamics in work teams, a very small thing becoming a very big thing. Not only very fast, but so fast that no one knew what happened. And it all took quite a bit of unraveling. They, of course, didn't want that to happen again. That's what they were looking for. On the positive side, as you will know yourselves as entrepreneurs, not a crisis is not always a bad thing. Winning a huge contract can be a crisis. A very small company called ASX Perpetual was suddenly asked to do the share float of a company called Telstra, which is one of the biggest telecommunication companies in the world. They won the contract, they were delighted, but anyone who in this group who has ever won a really big contract, you know perfectly well, it's happened to me, you swallow hard and there's a bit of a what now moment, isn't there? Now we have to deliver. And so they, of course, wanted to, if they were going to make any mistakes, not to make them in front of this gigantic client. So their idea is do the rehearsal first, get all their mistakes out of the way, and then hit the road running. Those are two examples.
Good. Thank you. Joel, you and I were talking at the table, and it's amazing what it's amazing what this country has seen as far as disasters across the country. We were talking about the 3 Category 4 hurricanes that hit. We're talking about the fires. Tell us a little bit about 2017 and what kind of year that was as far as disaster relief, and then at what point do you get to the point where you can no longer handle any more disasters?
Thanks, Ron. Yes, 2017 was a historic year. I'll give you 2 different metrics. Our president has, under the Stafford Act, when FEMA goes into action for a crisis, either an emergency or a major disaster, it's the result of a presidential declaration, usually at the request of a governor or tribal official. Our president, he has a year in office on Saturday. He'll have made 81 such declarations. That's compared to an average of 40 to 50 over the past 10 years. So that just tells you the number of things that we're dealing with. Second, the big name storms that and the fires that Ron is alluding to, absolutely correct. And two things about those: the three hurricanes, Harvey in Texas, hitting the fourth largest metropolitan area in the United States. Irma, which visited the islands before devastating the Keys and then rolling up the west coast of Florida. And then, of course, Maria, which devastated the island of Puerto Rico. Any one of those would have been the storm that we talk about of the teens, just as we talk about and plan against Katrina and Sandy. The difference for FEMA was we had all three of those simultaneously, so that means you've got, when you add the fires out west where we have a current situation now, but there was a previous one in October as well, so you basically had a crisis of some level across the entire coast to coast and extending 1,500 nautical miles east. Now, the second part of your question, when do you realize that you can't do it? When do you realize you need a bigger boat? Hopefully, your leadership recognizes that early. And our new administrator, Mr. Long, even though he was in office only less than 60 days, he recognized once Harvey hit and through partnership with NOAA, they give us our weather intel, we knew that Irma was going to be a threat as well. He realized that there was going to be more than what we could handle. So despite all of the planning, preparation, when you're in government, you can only prepare to the extent that you have authorities and resources. He quickly recognized there would be a gap and started making preparations for that. So I guess the sooner that you figure out you need something more, the sooner you identify the gap in that crisis to get what you need to get through it, the better the outcome will be.
Gwen, I know that you were involved and you were talking about big data, and the idea is I would imagine is scouring this data to be able to uncover trends or information that was absolutely necessary. How was what you did supporting the government in the crisis situation after 9/11? How did it work? How did you feed this information? How was the information used, as much as you can tell us?
I'll tell you, but then I'd have to kill you
right.
and everybody else here. John will help me. So I wanted to make a sort of an interesting analogy, and that was after 9/11, things essentially worked. If you think about our financial management systems, even though New York City had such a major impact, things basically kept running. And a lot of that was due to the Y2K crisis in 1999, because if you remember during that period of time, the rollover of the clock was going to change a lot of the existing the COBOL software, and so there was a huge concern that systems were going to crash during that time. And so a lot of work and money and effort went into redoing those systems. I remember one meeting where we were talking about disaster recovery after 9/11, or after Y2K. One of the systems administrators said his plan for disaster recovery was to put his resume on another database. And so, in driving through in Morocco, I was in Morocco in 1999, driving through the Atlas Mountains where they had no running water or electricity. The thought went through my mind, they're not going to have a Y2K problem here. But after Y2K, things essentially worked because of all the preparation. And so on 9/11, we were able to sustain through that without any major impact to financial systems. And so I think the point there is around recognizing crisis for other people and using that to improve your existing infrastructure, learning the lessons somewhere else. If somebody else gets a incoming missile email or alert system, take a look at your own systems and infrastructure rather than wait for things to happen yourself. So I think as a leader in the space, you're always trying to keep your pulse on what's happening in your business and manage as much from a risk perspective as you can. To John's point, I think one of the happiest and most terrifying days in my career was when we won a $10 million sole source contract at the CIA to help put in their first cloud computing platform, and being elated that we won this contract and then staring at the ceiling that night thinking, now we have to execute. And so it's always in, I think, preparation and planning. Thanks.
Jonathan, we haven't forgotten about you. I've got a number of questions. We were talking at the table, and I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and I was asking Jonathan about what kind of attempts have there been to sabotage the water supply. And I remember back in the 70s when someone decided that they were going to dump several gallons of LSD in the water supply because they thought it was a good idea to just tune in and drop out and have the people of Washington, D.C., all tripping. Now, what they didn't realize was the fact that apparently it all broke down in the chlorine in the water. So now I know that's probably hasn't happened, but for you, you've got this responsibility of 800,000 people in D.C., and then, of course, millions of visitors every year. What are the things that keep you up at night? What are the things that go wrong that I think Jon mentioned is some small things that can turn into a crisis overnight. Can you just, tell us what you worry about, what keeps you up at night?
I'm going to sound somewhat profound and say what worries me at night is actually the fantastic job that we do as a service. So everybody here in this room, I hope everybody here in this room at least, had a shower this morning, went to the bathroom, brushed their teeth, made a cup of coffee, sat down, and had a glass of water at breakfast time, right? Like it's all sitting there in front of us. So as an industry, we do that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We don't have Wednesday blackouts where you can't use water on Wednesdays because we don't have the capacity to provide it. But what I think that does specifically for residents and for businesses is it creates somewhat of an apathy. And everybody in this region that's been here for a minute remembers the Pepco misery of 2009 and everybody living without power. And how many people here lived for a week or multiple days without power, right? Like just a show of hands, how many people? Imagine doing the same thing without sewer service and water service. And well, you have a well, it's a little different. So it's because of the consistent supply and because it's always there and because we provide enough of it, it's actually that disruption, because the amount of times we've been on calls with businesses or apartment owners or hotel owners, and they're like, well, what do you mean it's like this? What do you mean I should have had a water supply plan for my business or for my hotel? What do you mean we have to evacuate and we can't stay here anymore? And it really ticks into minutes. And when I first started here in 2009, and I worked for the utility, I'm a big preparedness guy, and I like to be prepared, and I actually have go kits in the house, and we take it pretty seriously, for good or for worse. But to turn the water off and not use the bathroom, I challenge any of you to go a day. Like even my wife, who's not prone to foul language, came downstairs and said, "This is effing ridiculous, go and turn the water back on." And that was literally from Friday night till Saturday lunchtime. And the critical mission that we do and the critical function we provide completely innocuous to everybody is really what really keeps me awake, because it shocks people then into the reality that, you know, similar to what Joel had said with Puerto Rico, you know, people are taking water out of streams and bathing in it and drinking in it, and, you know, that part of the core mission, because there is no second system. You know, you can't buy a different, you know, water system. We don't have separate pump stations. We don't have different lines. We can't provide you different water. You know, most people in this room, your water comes from one source. Do you know where it is? Does anybody know where their water comes from when they turn their tap on this morning? Potomac River. And except for a very few people in northern Montgomery County and folks on the far south end of northern Virginia, there is no redundant source, right? There is no water, there is no Potomac River, there is no water. And for those of you that remember the oil spill, remember they had this sheen on the river? Oh, yes. We were successful in the region of using luck as a planning tool, and we were literally 24 hours away from putting 5 million people out of water. And that was 150 gallons of oil on the Potomac River. And it would have been between 5 and 6 million people. Like, it's, you know, like, people sit and talk to you about crisis decision making, and you're like, well, hang on, here we are at the center of the free world, and 150 gallons of oil is going to put 5 million people out of water and sewer service. And it's like they're the things that keep me up.
Now I'm worried.
You already knew this stuff, John.
Jonathan, you were talking at the table when we were sitting down here, and you were saying once you've identified something, and it was really interesting because we were asking you, well, what's the first sign of trouble? And you were talking about it's the individual. Could you talk about that and how you identify?
I knew you were going to. I knew I shouldn't have told you that. I tell you, I was talking to Ron at breakfast, and most people don't realize this. When we have contamination events, and it's the same as any utility, it's not DC water, it's not WSSC, it's not Fairfax water, wherever you are. When we have contamination events, the unfortunate truth is that we find out about those events by the people sitting in this room, right? You call up about taste, odor, color, pressure, you know, hey, I was drinking this water and it tasted funny. You know, it's our life, it's not like Star Trek, right? There are not little magic boxes that we wave over stuff and say, oh, you know, watch out, there's contamination in that water. And as a utility, we have to be incredibly sensitive to that reality. That folks call us and say, hey, my water tastes funny, it's a funny color, it's made me sick, whatever it's done to me, and that our response has to be immediate. So we tend to take a scorched earth approach and really isolate areas of our system to try and minimize the spread of that contamination. So,
Thank you. Joel, when crisis happens, and as you've already explained, it seems to be happening all the time and things that you have to deal with. Tell us your process of putting the teams together. Obviously, this all has to be planned, practiced, and so forth. Give us an idea behind the scenes, what happens once a crisis is identified, and then the step-by-step. How do you handle it?
Okay, absolutely. But first, I just want to highlight a couple things that Gwen and Jon said, because I think it shows not only the similarities between our portfolios, but how it relates to all y'all. The theme that I took from Gwen's remarks was preparation's the key, and sometimes what you're doing, what seems to be for something else, gets you exactly where you need to be for the big one, i.e. Y2K preparations with the payoff at 9/11. Jon and I are both fighting, our agencies are both fighting apathy, right? That's what happens when you do things perfectly all the time. If you get Batman to my right, then that guy is Superman, and you know all you need is the kryptonite, right? Everyone is now woken up from their apathy and say, hey, why, you know, we're Superman. Why isn't this fixed today? But his reminders that we are all the detectors of our water quality ties in with one of FEMA's things, which is how I will start to answer your question, sir, which is every citizen's a first responder, right? We don't know where the next disaster is going to strike. We can get great briefs from our partner, the National Oceanographic and Aeronautic Administration, on how many named storms there will be in 2018, but they're not going to tell us where, and they're not going to tell us when, and they're not going to tell us the magnitude. You don't know that until they actually hit, and that's where our professional first responders come in. That's where the state and local and business leaders come in, and that's where citizens come in as first responders. So back at FEMA, yes, sir, our mission is to plan and build a culture of preparedness throughout the nation for that. And the big picture, with an agency of 20,000 people, we're divided up into 10 regions, which are simply groups of states with a headquarters that each has a mini FEMA, if you will, that would interact with those 6 or 7 states and tribes. There are about over 500 recognized federal Indian tribes, by the way, who are also potential stakeholders, as well as the islands and territories of the United States. On top of that, at the national level, we have flyaway teams for the big crises. And so just the play-by-play, when you get something like a Harvey, Irma, Maria, to name them in order, we would have our preparations, our watch center up and running, and get that flyaway team pre-positioned or ready to be pre-positioned, along with some logistics to kind of prepare the space. You still don't know where it's going to hit. I mean, you're going to predict where it's going to hit, but you don't know what will happen. For example, with Harvey, that kind of did a sucker punch for us. It was a tropical storm less than 24 hours before it made landfall, Corpus Christi. That was, I don't want to sound callous, but okay, that was a normal hurricane, right? That would not have been the story Harvey was. Why Harvey became Harvey went back out to the Gulf, stayed there, and 5 feet of rain over 4 days as a tropical storm in Houston. That was the thing that was unexpected. So how did FEMA, go through all that? What I will tell you, what our number 2 told his peers at a Department of Homeland Security kind of hot wash on the whole affair. Really, it's 3 things, and the first one, we've already talked about: preparation. So what you do today is going to prepare you for that. Second, it's communications. There's a huge information flow problem. You need information, but you don't want to micromanage. People need to do their jobs, but you need headquarters needs information as well, so they can get the authorities and resources that are needed in addition. And then you need trust, those predefined roles and relationships, the training, the teams, so that people can get the job done. I could tell you more and more about that, but I will pause.
I wanted to share another commonality that we have across the group, and that is that with my 35 years in the intelligence community, success in our space is when nothing bad happens. And it's the same, I think, in the water and the emergency management organization. We're on the verge of another crisis with the looming Friday government shutdown. And I have a lot of empathy being a small business owner where I've taken mortgages out on my house to keep the business afloat for years. And it's one of those things where especially managing through the government shutdown, whether you're a government contractor or not, your business, if you're in the DC area, is impacted either directly or indirectly by that. And the crisis starts not if the government shuts down, but way before the government shuts down, because it impacts, as Joel mentioned, in the aspect of trust, that from a company perspective, in advance of the shutdown, you have to make a decision whether the loss for the lack of government income is going to be on the business side or on the employee side. If you send your employees home on furlough and their income is impacted, or whether as a company you decide to take the loss on your shoulders, that sets the trend. And in my experience, you can tell a company that's going to be successful in the long term, how they manage through crisis. That if in times of the internet growth, if you have companies that are always doing well and they never have crisis, they get overconfident. And they believe that they can handle anything, and they're always going to be on this upturn. But when you go through a crisis with a team, you learn how you're going to perform together as a team if you're focused on solving the problem and you're communicating well and you're preparing for the future and you're pulling together and learning from that. Or if the immediate reaction is to focus on blame and start laying off people is a very common reaction to that. So I think crisis management can be actually good. If anybody remembers, there was a great movie called The Gardener that had where he was a slow person, but he would make analogies like pruning is good for the tree because it's helps being there.
Peter Sellers, great movie.
Yeah, great movie. Thank you. But all the gardening analogies and pruning the branches, but it always has to do with if you can take advantage of these small crises to put better plans, better communications, and establish that trust with your senior leadership, then you're going to be stronger at the end of it.
John, you had some comments?
I just was inspired to add two thoughts, having listened to Joel and Gwywn and before them Jonathan. First of all, on that subject, just to pick up quickly from what Gwywn just said, that is something that interests me very greatly, the business about the intelligence community, which was also my alma mater, having a primary mission of nothing happening. Now think about that for a minute as far as the people dynamics are concerned in your organisation. You walk into the White House, you say, guess what, congratulate me, absolutely nothing happened in the last 6 months. Am I not fantastic? Give me a medal. Well, no one's going to do that. So if you have people in your organisation, part of whose portfolio is to avoid crisis, to anticipate problems, to avoid bad things happening, and those bad things duly don't happen because they've done their jobs, they will not get external reward for that. So it's so terribly important to make sure that they have some sort of internal reward and some kind of acknowledgements. And my old community is often criticised for our penchant for plaques and awards and medals and parties. So are the police. Well, guess what? That's why. That's the reason. You have to generate, as the leader, you will need to generate those rewards more often than not in areas that are to do with preventing bad things from happening if you're lucky and they don't happen. The second thing is that these three distinguished people spoke individually and severally about planning as a way of managing the crises we all know are coming. And a crisis, of course, need not be a hurricane. A crisis could be an angry client. A crisis could be a government shutdown when you had a contract with a delivery date. What do you do now? And we may be there in a few days. Planning is terribly important, but I want to recommend one other thing. On planning, if anyone's had any involvement with the military and any training through them, you will have heard what Peter VI is. I'm going to tidy it up a little bit for this audience. Peter, those of you who are laughing, yeah, I see you. Prior planning and preparation prevents particularly poor performance, is what they'll tell you, and I recommend that. One other thing I recommend, though, is practice. Rehearsal and practice. The reason for that is that the human being is a constant mystery to anybody who has any degree of humility, but humans are also predictable in certain ways, and we do know some things about how people learn. And one of the things we know is that if you sat in a classroom and you did the course on how to react when somebody comes in and starts shooting up the place, when somebody comes in and starts shooting up the place, you will not remember a damn thing. Is that a surprise to anybody? And I've been in that situation as a first responder and also a bit in the intel community, and I promise you there are two kinds of memory that are important to know if you're managing crisis. One is situational memory and the other is emotional memory. Situational memory means that we'll only access the skills we need in a similar situation. So what you learn in the classroom is not going to work when a customer's screaming in your face. Emotional memory is we only action the behaviours that we learn in the same emotional state. So if you are in extreme stress and you've had no sleep and everybody's trying to get in your ear during a crisis, you need to have learned and rehearsed those skills when you were short of sleep under extreme stress and everyone was getting in your ear. So I would urge you to come up with little scenarios and practice and rehearsal to make sure that your people are really ready.
Yeah, that's great advice. John, I know you've done training in Fortune 500 companies for many years, and where do you see I guess the biggest weakness in the big companies as far as crisis training or crisis understanding or ability to handle crisis? Do you see any consistency across many of the companies you work with?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. I'm going to give an answer that ought to be familiar to many of you. I take it almost everybody here has heard the term disruptors. Disruptive this, disruptive that, disruptive industry. That's the biggest threat that the Fortune 500 companies see. Somebody comes up with the $5 solution to the $1 million problem. And they've been solving the $1 million problem for $1 million for 20 years.
And you know, John, that's the problem for our small to mid-market businesses here. 5 years ago, if you were running a small cab company in the Washington, D.C. area, and this crazy thing called Uber comes along, you know, you're out of business overnight because you don't have the wherewithal to handle that. So we do a lot of discussion in this group, and we'll do some more as we go through the year on this whole concept of disruptors. And you know, we've never presented it as part of a crisis, but you're absolutely right. It creates a crisis.
So yes, the power can go off, and yes, the gas line can blow up. That happened to Toyota, yet again, shut them down for days. All unions can be a problem, but the number one thing they fear is the thing they don't know about, the disruption that's just around the corner. Yeah. The small thing, because organisations resemble living things much more than they resemble machines. This was a conceit we retained from the Industrial Revolution. And you'll hear it again in management books still. The organisation should run like a well-oiled machine. No, the organisation is a living thing. It runs like living things. This is why plant biology and the study of living systems is so absolutely vital now to the understanding of team dynamics. And living things are all about non-linear events. A tiny input causes a massive consequence that you couldn't possibly have foreseen. A massive input that you think would be disastrous has no discernible effect. And these are the things that worry the big companies.
Excellent. Thank you. Joel, you had something?
Yeah, so inspired by John's answer on disruptors, I mean, yes, that's a great way as a synonym for crises. But of course, someone who's disrupting your business, right, that's business opportunity for them. So you can kind of see sort of the Chinese character that every crisis is challenge and opportunity. There's the saying that, you know, let no crisis go unexploited. All kidding aside, when your organization has faced a crisis, or as Gwen is coaching us, you know, to learn wisely from the crises of others, that's an opportunity to wake up from the apathy and use that to disrupt your organization in a civilized manner to make improvements so that you can be better prepared for the next one. Now, you are going to prepare for the disruptions that you know, such as Katrina, you know, post-2005. That one did not turn out so well, but we were a different agency now in 2018. Why? Because we did that as a living organism. The feedback assessment made some changes, had some help, got some new authorities from Congress, got some resources, but the analogy is consistent. You take the disruption that happened, you see what can I learn from this and change so that I can be ready the next time.
I'd like to add something to that, and I think that in times of crisis, that's always a time of opportunity as well, that from a small business perspective, small businesses are going to succeed if they do two things, and that is if you're solving a point of pain and if you're differentiated from everybody else. And those two things I think are really key, that if you can be there first and offer something that nobody else can offer. And even to the big companies, if you think about the Apple with the iPhone, if you told me 10 years ago that I would be staring as much as I do about this small box in my house, and I've replaced my camera, my GPS, my TV set, you know, all of these different devices have consolidated into this. Consumers didn't know they needed this, but it solved a point of pain, and it was highly differentiated. Jeff Bezos from Amazon said, don't focus on the customer, not on the competition. And I think that's a really key thing when companies are focused on what's happening around them instead of the intense focus on the customer, that if you can feel your customer's pain and understand what they need to move that business step ahead, then you're able to partner with them, especially in time of crisis.
I'll also add to that too. There's been a lot of talk about planning, and from a pure business standpoint and emergency management standpoint, I think for all of you in the room, it's important to note that there's planning for the response. So what to do with the hurricane, what to do with the active shooter, but it's also crucial as your organizations to think about the recovery piece. So how am I planning for the recovery? Because if you, it's a fact, and I'm sure Joel, who's much smarter than I am, can give you a number, but most organizations that don't have recovery plans and continuity of operation plans don't recover and don't continue operations, right? They saw that in Katrina. They've seen it a little bit in Harvey, where it's crucial to plan for the exit as much as it is to plan for the entry, right? Because what happens on the front end, again, Joel will probably disagree with me, but from a business standpoint, FEMA really, for everybody in this room and for me as a utility, is a giant bank, right? It's not, seriously.
I will disagree with that one.
Right? See, it's not, FEMA is not going to come and help you with your business. FEMA is going to come and provide access to funding to help you support your recovery. Right? It's a very important distinction, because people see FEMA as the fire, and we were talking about this at breakfast, people in times of crisis see FEMA as the fire brigade, the police department, the army, the National Guard. They are not. They are not. They are a bank function that allows you to access capital to help you recover from disaster and crisis, right?
John, you were doing so well.
I'm
You said the word of the day, which really is recovery. That is one of our phases, is what happens after the response phase. I was doing the Nationals head bobble with you. Yes, you have to plan for the exit. The recovery is the harder, longer part. But, my friend, we are not a giant bank. You are forcing me now to get technical. If you need to get your small business back on track, that is not FEMA, my friends. That is the Small Business Association. In all seriousness, the reason why we are sometimes mistaken by our federal and local partners for that giant ATM, you said, that is actually how my boss, when he...
I told them it would be boring if there was no controversy.
That's when keeping your resume on a separate database is a...
Yes, and I'm going to move mine right now. Seriously, when we have steam out of our ears, it's because someone is thinking of FEMA as the giant bank. We're not a giant bank. The mission is to work with the states, the local governments, the first responders, the citizens, the businesses, to prepare for and then respond and recover from the emergencies. Yes, there's money that goes into that, and let me try to explain briefly how that works. There are things called grants that are various purposes. Homeland Security has millions of dollars worth of grants. Little known fact that FEMA actually executes the vast majority of the grants. So the fact that John has equipment at all, calling him out, is probably, if I went back to our headquarters and pulled the string, we have provided grant money to the District of Columbia and bought him some equipment. So yes, guilty as charged in that regard.
Lots of equipment.
In order to prepare the nation, because we can't just send John out, with his Superman outfit to fix the plumbing by himself. He needs teammates, he needs equipment, they need training, they need to exercise that training, as John said. But when it gets to the declarations, the 81 that I talked to you that the president has made just in what is almost his first year in office, there is a partnership there where under the Stafford Act, now that you have a declaration for a major disaster, the feds will pay 75% of qualifying costs. The local government, the state government, has skin in the game to the tune of at least 25%. That gives us the power, that and other authority in the Stafford Act, to what we call mission assign, which is a polite way to say direct action. So our big partner, DOD, we needed a flyaway medical team. We needed warships, flyaway medical team for Puerto Rico. We needed warships off the coast of Florida to rescue the Keys. We were able to do that through that Mission Assignment Authority, fully funded. It'll still be here on Saturday no matter what happens in the dome. That's all I have. And if someone's in the press, don't quote any of that. Thank you.
For a minute there, it was sounding like Jonathan was like my teenage son, asking for, you know, more and more things from.
No, and you
from
can't
Dad.
have the car Saturday either.
Let's do this, because I could go on forever with this group, but you know, we have a little bit of time for a couple of questions, and I wanted to make sure the audience had a chance. Ines, you have a question?
Jill, what happened in Puerto Rico? With all this, you know, you talk about planning and preparedness, and what happened in Puerto Rico? You talk about Katrina, you talked about Houston, but what about Puerto Rico?
Yep. So Inez is rightfully, as I would have anticipated, what happened with Puerto Rico. Inez, our entire strategy and authorities under Stafford Act and our organization is designed to respond, to prepare for, and then respond, recover, and mitigate disasters. But it's premised that we have a fiscally solvent, a capable, and a cooperative state partner. Okay? I am not the spokesman for FEMA, so I'm going to let others decide, based on what they know of the media reports, whether those attributes are true. But I think one of my teammates up here, and it might have been John, who says, "Hey, you know, the state of utopia didn't do X, Y, Z, but it's right the federal government or Congress that people are pointing to." For the issue with Puerto Rico, obviously you have they had the double hit. It was Irma and then Maria. It was a devastating hit in the case of Maria, where you started as a starting position with about 90% of the power out. You have a varsity level problem when your problem is 1,500 nautical miles away, so that roads are not an option. Everything has to come in by land or air. And of course, in your starting position, your airfields and seaports may not be operational. I'm tempted to say more, but have I answered your question, ma'am, about why our recovery in La Isla del Encanto has been significantly different than the success stories in Texas and Florida? I let the record show. We have head nods. I defer the balance of my time.
So we don't get him in trouble.
Hey, Ron,
yes.
can I just chime in there quickly? And I think I'm gonna help Joel out a little.
Thank you, my friend.
I am. But first off, I am gonna say FEMA is still a giant bank, but the hang on.
So
no,
much for help.
Let me quantify. The key to it, and this will answer your question about Puerto Rico. There is a very defined and distinct process. So when I said FEMA's a giant bank, you all thought trucks shoveling cash off and you just coming out and picking it all up and taking it back to your business. It is a process and a function. There is a methodology and a method to how you access that funding, and as Joel rightly pointed out, it's all local. So the access to the giant bank is not through FEMA, it's through the local organisation. And if those local organisations, the business folks, the county emergency management, the state emergency management is weak and inconsistent in its operation and management, then no amount of federal FEMA assistance can help that condition. And I'll give you a real world example. So I'm chair of the Water Sector Coordinating Council, right? So we represent 155,000 water and wastewater utilities in the United States. We assembled mission lists, mission ready packages, we assembled personnel, we assembled staff, we put them all into FEMA's EMAC roster. We said we're ready to go to help Puerto Rico, we will self-fund, we'll go down and help. And the response from the state and local was thanks but no thanks, right? So a lot of the perception, the outcome is very personal and very real, and the people that are drinking water out of streams and living in dark houses and are living in total destruction is not to be diminished. But emergency management, crisis response is all at the local level, no matter what you say, right? And no matter what you think or what you wish happens. And what you see time and time again is the more organised the county and state is, the better the response will be, right? New York, 9/11, Texas, Harvey, even here in Montgomery County and Northern Virginia, because we have very well organised, very well equipped, very well staffed emergency management functions that know very well how to access FEMA's, I hate to use the word bank, but bank.
Joel, did you have a...
So I do want to thank the new FEMA spokesman for Jonathan Reeves. He's absolutely correct, exception to that bank comment. The issue, of course, is that FEMA is reimbursing two issues. One, he says the local government, right? If you're prepared, and again, the disaster was your pop quiz. So, is your infrastructure weatherproof? Do you have the building codes that you need, or are things going to basically get literally blown away or flooded out? Those are some of the technical details behind, I think, John's very, very valid and much appreciated points, sir. Again, back to the bank thing. We are not the bank. We reimburse the state, but John is absolutely correct. That's a process, meaning that takes time. Let me use, for example, the National Guard units that through EMAC, right, Emergency Mutual Assistance compacts, can assist other states. We don't pay that National Guard of the state of Utopia. They get reimbursed from that state, from the receiving state. So that's a process. That's why the fiscal health of the affected state is relevant to the equation, and that's all I have.
I want to make sure that we get you out of here at 9:30 because that's it's a promise that we do. So that I know everybody's very, very busy. I think we're running. Yeah, we're running short. Would you all have just a few minutes to stick around? And if you have some questions, come on up. That'll allow the people that have to get back to the office to get back to the office. Let's give a round of applause for our panel today. Thank you all very, very much. I learned that FEMA was a bank today, and I did not know that. And I
Dear, oh dear,
You
oh
need to
dear.
take your antihistamines more, Ron. Not a giant bank. Federal partner.
So, Joel, all kidding aside, thank you very, very much. Gwen, Jonathan, and John, thank you very, very much. It was wonderful to have you all here today. Thank you. Thank you. If anybody's interested in the Global CEO Boardroom, please come see me or my two friends over here, Ed and Rick, and we'll talk to you about that. We have a workshop that's starting at 10 o'clock. If you would go to the center hall and head down the hall, there'll be signs to where the workshop will be held. Thank you all very much. Don't forget, we have the Governor of Maryland coming here February 15th. I would advise you, if you intend to come, to register early because it's going to be sold out. So thank you all very much. Have a great day. Thank you.